What's up, everybody? It's Sam Shaw here, founder of Wall Street Mastermind. I'm back today with another client interview for you guys. Excited to have Andrew on here with us today. Andrew just finished going through the summer 2022 recruiting process, and had a very successful outcome. And so, wanted to get him on here to talk to you guys about his experience and just share some insights on how he was able to get to where he is today, and hopefully it helps you guys. So, Andrew, thank you for taking the time to be on here and talk to us today.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess before we dive into everything, if you don't mind just introducing yourself real quick so people have a sense for who you are as a candidate and things like that.
So I'm Andrew. I'm currently a junior at Colgate University, which is in upstate New York, if you haven't heard of it. I'm on the Division I golf team here, so I spent a fair amount of time, playing golf growing up and playing sports just in general. I'm a political science major, which to some of you might come as a surprise, that someone in that kind of with that kind of an interest would end up in investment banking, but I would argue that if anything, it helped me. So that's kind of just where I am. That's what I study, and that's kind of the most relevant, I guess, pieces of information as it pertains to my background.
Cool, awesome. So I guess let's go back to the beginning. When did you first realize that investment banking was what you wanted to pursue as a career?
Honestly, I didn't know for a fact until last May, and that was pretty late, if we're being fully honest, because a lot of the processes for the boutiques, for example, started in like February and March. So I didn't know investment banking specifically was what I wanted to do until May of the year that I was trying to get recruited for the next year.
So
So that
that's
would be this
May
past.
of sophomore year, basically, like at the very end of your sophomore.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. And I was totally new and had no idea really what I was doing at the time. And I didn't fully understand at all of when I first got into it in May, like kind of what this process entails.
Yeah.
But I at that point I knew it's what I wanted to do. So
Yeah.
that's kind of where it started.
So, like, what did you do starting in May? Like, once you decided, like, hey, I want to pursue banking, like, how did you go about it? Because you probably had a short period of time there. I don't think you joined Wall Street Mastermind until like June, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was June.
Yeah.
So when I actually had started my networking, just in general, in January. So
Okay.
I talked to people on the street, some investment bankers, but not all. And so I think when I decided I wanted to do IB, I started to kind of hone in on those that I had already spoken to that were in IB specifically,
Yeah.
and just kind of picking their brain, trying to see like what the process is like. I wasn't sure if it was going to be like, you reach out to a couple of people and they put you in the right spot, or if I didn't know that it was going to be kind of like an application process like college. I started to kind of reconnect with those people I'd already spoken to, and I really tried to talk to as many people as I could that have gone to my school.
Got it.
So that's kind of where I started, just networking and trying to learn more.
Got it. And so, like, how was that going for you? Or, like, what made you decide to, work with Wall Street Mastermind a month later? Because, like, not everyone joins something like Wall Street Mastermind, right? In fact, I would say we're kind of still somewhat of a well-kept secret, maybe not, I don't know. But, we've only worked with a couple hundred students in the last 3+ years or so out of, I mean, in that time, there's got to be tens of thousands of students who try to apply, right? So, like, what was it that made you want to do something like this as opposed to, say, I don't know, just doing what everyone is already doing, which is probably, I don't know, downloading the Breaking and Wall Street guides and just reading it front to back, or doing
Oh
something.
yeah, yeah, I did that too. I did download those. For me, and I mentioned the political science helping me like as being as a major, but I think the one detriment is that I just didn't have as much exposure to the technicals and the technical concepts needed for these interviews. So I think when I came to Wall Street Mastermind, my number one priority was trying to find something that would be able to teach me the technicals in a way that I would learn best from.
Mm,
And I knew that I would not learn best downloading something and just doing practice problems. I saw that Wall Street Mastermind had very detailed videos for all of the subjects and like all the concepts. And I knew that that was something that had worked for me in the past in other classes that I'd taken at school,
yeah,
more specifically math classes in high school that actually were like flipped classroom, learn via videos and then work in class. So I knew that kind of format, that very structured, regimented, approach to teaching with the videos, being able to replay them would definitely work for me. And I think that the structure also was going to help me feel like I was actually making progress. So that was the biggest thing for me, definitely the number one. But I also it became clear to me that there were certain things that Wall Street Mastermind could help with when it came to like maybe touching up my resume a little bit, sharpening my approach to my behaviorals. Definitely shaped my behaviorals more than I would have anticipated. I went into it thinking, oh, it's just going to be mostly technical for me, but
yeah,
it actually transformed my behaviorals as well.
yeah,
And then just having a resource to be able to answer any questions I had spur of the moment. So,
yeah.
but I would say to answer the question directly, the initial attraction was the technical guide, but then it ended up being more than that.
Got it. Got it. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, I feel like we hear that a lot, which is a lot of people, they are the most worried about their technicals because
Yeah,
that's one of those things where there's a right answer and a wrong answer to the questions. And if you're sitting in an interview and you actually just don't know how to answer the question, it becomes very obvious, right? And then that
yes,
kind of ruins the entire interview. Whereas with most people, I feel like when they think about the behavioral interview, it's kind of like, well, there isn't really so much like a right answer or a wrong answer. It's more just, does your answer stand out, or are your answers better than other people's answers? And for that, people feel
yeah,
like, even if you get a question that kind of catches you off guard, you can maybe make something up on the spot. So it doesn't seem like as
yes,
big of a deal, right? Although your feelings in hindsight also is pretty common, which is when someone actually, like someone on our team actually helps you with your behavioral answers, then you realize just how much better it could actually be. But until you
yeah,
see it, it's kind of
totally.
hard to believe it, right?
Yeah, I feel like it became so much more clear to me what the like because of Wall Street Mastermind, I was able to figure out what they're really looking for in all of these questions. So when I did have certain questions like in my eventual super day for the job that I got,
Yeah,
there was at least one question that was like kind of caught me off guard, but
yeah,
I had an idea just like just somewhat of a template in my brain of like what are they actually looking for, what am I supposed to share,
yeah,
and so I'm able to come
yeah.
up with responses on the fly having known that.
Right. Do you remember what was the question that caught you off guard?
No, I don't actually.
Okay.
It's been a few months now for
No, no,
sure,
it's
but if
fine.
I
I was
if
just,
I remember it.
yeah, yeah, I was just curious. It's not a big deal, but no, I think you're absolutely right though. It's like the way we try to prepare you guys for these things is not teaching you like exactly what to say or giving you a script where it's like, oh, if you get asked this, then say this. If you get asked that, then say that. But it's more so giving you guys a framework to follow and teaching you how to think so that, because at the end of the day, it's impossible to predict with 100% precision what questions you're going to get asked in an interview, right? So
Yep.
if we were just teaching you to be robotic and to say exactly, these words verbatim or whatever, that would never work, right? Whether it's on the behavioral or the technical side, but it's more about teaching you how to think about these questions and be able to adapt on the fly. That's what's going to allow you to basically handle all the curveball questions that are inevitably going to come your way, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I guess the other thing that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting is just like you knew what was effective for you in terms of your learning style, right? Which is
Yeah.
I always talk to people about this. I think it's kind of funny that most of us we pay so much money to go to school, to go to lecture, learn from our professors, go to office hours or a section where we have a TA and we ask questions and we do homework assignments, and that's how we're all used to learning in school, right? And that's what we're paying to do when we go to college. What we don't do is pay a couple $100, buy a textbook, and stay at home and read the textbook on our own, and then just tell ourselves that okay, now I understand everything, right? Because
Yeah. Yeah.
that's just not like the most effective way to learn. And for some reason though, it's kind of become the industry norm to learn your technicals that way and learn your behaviorals that way when you're preparing for job interviews, which to me is like it's just weird. Like I don't know how it became that way, but it's like, yeah.
I just don't think people understand. At least I didn't. They don't really understand the extent and like the magnitude of this process. They don't like this. This is not, or at least in my case, I didn't put this in the same category of something that I needed to systematically prepare for and really, spend like as much time as I would on a paper, like a homework assignment. I thought, that this would just be demonstrating interest,
Right,
shaking hands with a couple of people, having some casual conversations,
right.
and then, just having your internship and then going from there. So I maybe that's not the case with everyone else, but I just don't think that it's really understood like the
You bring up a
extent
good
of it.
point. Yeah, you bring up a really good point, which is in hindsight now but
Yeah.
going into it you didn't really think about it that way, and most people probably also don't think about it that way, right?
Yep.
But that makes a lot of sense. And so I mean, I think look, the other thing too is kind of what you mentioned earlier, because part of why you probably wanted to join Wall Street Mastermind too is like you mentioned, you didn't realize you wanted to do IB until May of sophomore year, which is really late in the process, right? And obviously, just like most other people, your goal at the time was still to get into a top tier bank, right? Like ideally, you want to get into like a bulge bracket or elite boutique bank, right? And
Yep.
so, even if you knew what you needed to do, like, okay, I need to go out and network, I need to go out and, prep for my technical interviews, prep for my behavioral interviews. The other, the other factor that I feel like a lot of people don't take into account is the time, like timing of things, or
Definitely.
like how long is it going to take for me to learn everything I need to learn, or how long is it going to take for me to prepare adequately so that I can do well in all these areas. Is like if I remove the constraint of time and I said, "Hey Andrew, you have unlimited time to learn all these things," like then it's no big deal. Like you'll learn it eventually, right? Like you can get there
Yes.
with enough time. But if you're like in a rush and interviews are coming up in a couple weeks or in a month or even 2 months, then it's a whole different ballgame, right?
Yep. Exactly.
Um, and so like what what month did you get your offer again? I mean, I know
I
it's
got my offer in July, late July.
okay. So like a month after you joined our program, basically, was when you got your offer.
Yes. Yeah,
And that
which
means
is
that
crazy.
the interview process actually started even before that, right?
Yeah, I probably had my first interview in late May. It was not for the place I got the job. The place I got the job I got was probably first round was second week of June, or like third week of June, something
Okay.
like that.
Okay. So yeah, that's like
It was like a week after we had done. I think it was a week or two after I had started with Wall Street Mastermind was my first round for the place that I'm ultimately working at.
yeah, I actually I'm looking here in my records. You joined Wall Street Mastermind mid June. So yeah, if
Mid
this was
June. Oh,
yeah, so if it was like second or third week of June, it literally was like a week or two after you started the program and you had this interview coming up.
Yeah, I think I had the interview like 10 days later, and it was super technical, like super technical.
Right.
So yeah.
So like what like let's walk us through like what happened during those first 10 days then. It's like you come into the program, you know you have this interview, and were you starting kind of from scratch in terms of interview prep
Sorry,
or
you cut out for a little bit there. Do you
oh I
mind
yeah, yeah.
restarting that question? You cut out for a bit.
Yeah, no worries. I was just saying, can you walk us through like kind of those first 10 to 15 days in the program where you had just come in and you just found out you have an interview that's coming up? Obviously, it's very little time, right? Like, what were those 1 or 2 weeks like? Like, how did you approach this preparation process? Were you starting from scratch or like, how did you get up to speed so quickly? I guess.
Yeah, I had to work pretty hard. I This is summer, keep in mind, and this is really it's a time that I want to be playing golf and staying in shape for the season. So I'm not used to it, but I had to basically sit down at my desk and go through the technical interviews for hours for like the whole week. And I basically didn't leave my desk. So I was, because I was like, I have to get through this, like at least this portion of the technical interviews. So I got through the valuations, I got through the accounting,
Yeah.
and it took me a while, but that was like I literally just remember just sitting in my desk and just working for hours and hours and hours, going to bed, waking up, like doing whatever, and then repeating that process. So for me, it felt like the technicals were starting from scratch. But in terms of behaviorals, I think the few days prior to getting the first round interview, I just worked through my behaviorals and kind of combed those out. So I was like working from the beginning. I didn't feel like when I started Wall Street Mastermind that I had to start from like the first module. I kind of given the time factor we talked about, I
Yeah.
had to jump straight into revising my well creating and then revising my behaviorals, and then once I got the interview, I started working to prepare for the technicals.
Yeah.
But it was a cram, it was a time crunch, and I spent a lot of time just hunched over a desk.
Yeah.
But it definitely paid off because that obviously the interview went well.
Yeah. I guess I mean if you just study for like a week straight between your behavioral and technicals, what are we talking about? Like 20, 30, 40 hours? It was like a full-time job
Oh,
basically.
I mean, it felt like a full-time job to an extent. I always say, like, when people ask me, like, what did I do last summer? I definitely like I say like I worked, I played golf to stay in shape for the season, and I very much was interviewing and preparing for interviews because the third one honestly was probably the biggest time commitment out of them all when it
Yeah.
was in the thick of the battle.
Yeah.
So it was a huge time commitment. I don't remember the hours exactly. All I know is that like I really was spending more time, really working and studying than I'm used to on like a June 23rd on a Friday kind of thing.
Right. Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think like what worked well was because you could basically draft out all of your behavioral answers first based on some of the frameworks that we provided, and then you can have our team review it for you like we talked about earlier. And then while we're reviewing your answers, which usually takes us a few days because we go pretty in depth, it's not like you're just sitting around and waiting for that. You can simultaneously work on
Work on the
learning the
technical.
technicals, and
Yep.
then when we come back with the behavioral feedback, you can then make the changes necessary on that side. And so we're always kind of multitasking and making sure that we're getting, the most output possible in those 1 or 2 weeks that we have, right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. Um, so then you just, I guess after that, you went through the process and it's basically just a standard first round, then super day, then offer type of deal, or what was that like for you?
No, actually, mine was kind of weird. I had the first round interview, and then after that, I officially applied to the firm after the first round interview in first week of July, which meant that I then had to do not it wasn't a high review, but it was the equivalent of their software that they had. So
Yeah.
then I did like a higher view, and then once that got through, then I got invited to the super day,
Okay.
and then the super day, and that was it. So it was like 3 rounds ish if you want to count the video in the middle,
Got it.
but it to me it felt like, the first round really obviously was the most impactful as
Right.
opposed to like the video interview. But it was kind of like three. It was a
How,
weird.
how did you end up? Everyone's probably wondering, how did you end up doing the first round before you applied? Like,
So that's the thing. Like, so I don't go to a target school, but there's a fair amount of people who work on Wall Street that go to Colgate or have gone to Colgate. And at this particular firm, there was a decent sized network of Colgate alum.
mm,
So I had been in touch with them. And honestly, I didn't know I wanted to be an investment banker until May, but I was going to investment bank, like info sessions here on campus. And
right.
I just remember this one guy who is an MD at the bank that I'm working at, and I just remember writing his name down. I was like, maybe this will be helpful for me later. And then I ended up actually like reaching out to him. He put me in touch with a lot of like, other alum. And so I got this interview because I was really in touch with my networking, and I also just so happened to get in touch with the right people.
Mm,
So they set me up with an interview, and then and honestly, they had the interview set up before the application, probably because they were trying to scramble and compete with the other banks,
mm,
because there were some other like banks that had filled their classes, were almost done, and they were just trying to scramble to compete. So I think they're like, all right, we got to expedite this. We know applications haven't really opened yet, but we can still kind of interview people. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case with some other people too.
got it. Got it. Because, like, out of the bulge bracket and elite boutique banks out there, I mean, we're talking what, June, July-ish now at this point.
Yeah,
At that point, like, most of the elite boutique and bulge bracket banks are done hiring already or almost done
yeah.
hiring, and so they're actually one of the last top tier banks probably to kick off their processes, right? Right.
Yeah, like obviously with the exception of Goldman, who starts in July and then
Right.
goes really quickly from there.
Right.
It was, yeah, it's definitely probably, it was probably one of the later ones for this year, but this year was one of the earlier, like the process was earlier than it's ever been probably overall. So
Well,
you
you know,
never
we
really
say
know.
that we
Lord
say
knows
that
it.
we say that every year. So
Yeah, so interviewing, like, banks might fill their classes in February this year. You don't know. You might have
you
to get
don't
on
know,
it now
yeah,
if you want to get
seriously.
up.
I mean, we always joke someday they'll be recruiting high school seniors, but hopefully,
Yeah, well, at this rate, yeah.
hopefully not, but we'll see, I guess. But I mean, joking aside though, that is like the importance for most of our listeners. That is the importance of starting as early as possible, right? I mean, obviously, you started pretty late in the process, and it still worked out for you. But I know so many people who started late and just couldn't make it, right? Because
Yeah.
it's tough out there. And um, it sounds like though this was your first interview that you had after joining Wall Street Mastermind, and then you just got the offer and accepted it, and then you were done. Is that right? Or did you have other banks that you were talking to?
I
Or
think so.
okay,
There were other banks, and like personally, I had a tremendous amount of success with interviews with people, first round phone screenings that were like actual humans. I didn't have as much success with the higher views. However, I actually got feedback from the bank that I'm working at. They sent me feedback on the video interview that I did for them,
yeah.
and it went super well. So
Oh,
I don't fully understand the higher view, how that all went down, but there were definitely other places that I was interviewing for, and I did have at least one other super day at a really good firm lined up, but I just so happened to get this offer first, and I took it. But
got it.
yeah,
That's great, man. I mean, look, obviously the offer you got, it's a great bank, top tier bank, and if you can get an offer like that, then there's no there's no reason to shop around, you know. Um, and I don't know who
Yep,
you're. I don't know.
exactly.
Yeah, like I don't know who your other super day with, but you know, it's probably around the same tier, if not maybe a little bit worse, right? I mean, at that stage of the process, at least, I
Yeah, it
can.
was exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's great, man. So obviously, you had a really successful outcome. I guess, you know, one last question for you. Um, was there like a piece of advice that you got from someone during the process that just really helped you tremendously that you maybe want to pass on to the other students who are, you know, just going through recruiting now or about to go through recruiting? Like, is there anything like that that, you know, maybe helped you a lot, saved you a lot of time, whatever it may be?
Well, obviously the biggest piece of advice I would give anyone is start as early like as you can. Like I have some friends who are sophomores here, who are potentially interested, and I'm really going to be pushing them like soon to at least start thinking so they could know whether or not they really want to do this earlier, so that if they do, they can get started with that. So
Yeah.
definitely like try to get start as early as you can, because if I had started much earlier, maybe I would have had more interviews, I would have had more options, who knows. Yeah, I'm inclined to believe so, but it's just I think time is definitely an ally that you want to have.
Yeah.
And then other than that, I think, kind of just like we were talking about, understand that this is a process that requires a legitimate amount of work. It is not an impossible process. It is not unlike something you've ever seen before. You just have to give it the proper time of day and the proper consideration. And we talk about this. We invest in our education, we invest in our sports, we invest in a lot of things. We put things on the table in order to get return. So I think in this case, it's the same thing. There's sacrifices that are going to have to be made. You're going to have to, approach this methodically like you would anything else that you care about.
Yeah.
And just so I think it's just understanding the magnitude of it. So I think those are the two biggest things. Is like don't be intimidated. Like this is work that you're capable of doing. I'm assuming if you want to be in investment banking, like you probably are academically inclined. You're probably decently smart. So I'm assuming that you'd be able to make this adjustment and figure it out. But
Yeah.
it definitely requires time, and you're going to have to sacrifice a chunk of your spring and your summer. But the nice part about this early process is you can be done in June and then enjoy the rest of your summer knowing that you have your job. So it's like there's definitely trade-offs with everything, but
I
definitely
mean,
give it the time.
there are very few career paths out there where you're going into junior year, the second half of your college career, already knowing you have a job lined up, and then like going to senior year post internship, having that job security, knowing you have your full time offer. It is pretty sweet, but obviously you have to come out the other side first, right? Um,
Yep. Yep.
but I think all the advice that you just gave, if I were to really sum it up, it's just like don't take this process lightly, right? Like there are a lot of people who
Yeah.
think, oh, I can start later, or like some people just out of ignorance, they don't realize how early recruiting starts, and they're like, oh, like getting a job is something that seniors do. I mean, by the time you're a senior, it's really, really
Yeah.
for banking recruiting, right? And then the other thing is like the other reason why you want to start early is because typically it's probably going to take more time than you think, you know, and
Yes.
not even just not because it's rocket science or anything, but just because if you want to be the type of candidate that's actually going to be competitive, there's just so many things that you have to juggle. You got to keep up your grades in school, which is a pretty big time commitment in and of itself. You got to have other extracurricular activities, like you're a student athlete. That's obviously a huge time commitment. You got to do some internships and build up your resume. That takes time. You got to network. You got to prep for the interview. So it's just like you have a social life. There's just a lot to fit into the 24 hours that we have in a day, right? And so
Yes.
the sooner that you start, um, the better the outcome's going to be. And then like if that's not enough and you need to be even more efficient, then I would say like go out and get help, right? I mean, there's obviously like the more efficient way of doing things, and then there's like the less efficient way of doing things. Like some people say, oh, I just want to try to figure everything out on my own, which could be done. Not saying it can't be, but it's just going to take a lot longer. It's going to take a lot more trial and error. You may or may not, get the answer that you're supposed to get to because sometimes you just don't know. Versus if you have like a roadmap and a framework to follow, and it's one that's been used hundreds of times successfully by other people before, then that gives you a lot more confidence that you're on the right track, right? And that's kind of like
Yep. Yep.
what we're here for here at Wall Street Mastermind, right? So, guys, I guess for those of you who are still listening, um, if that sounds like you, where you want to put your best foot forward, you just want to do this in the most efficient way possible, you want to get the best offer you can, then I want to invite you to reach out to us. In fact, before you even speak to us and speak to anyone on our team, what we're doing now is you can actually reach out and we'll let you schedule a free virtual coffee chat with one of our alumni who's been through Wall Street Mastermind, and they're just, they're currently upperclassmen. They just went through the recruiting process successfully, but just like a networking opportunity for you to ask the upperclassmen whatever you want. It could be about recruiting, about how they got into the bank that they got into. You could ask them about Wall Street Mastermind if you want to. You don't have to, but just like a networking opportunity. And then, of course, after you talk to them, get whatever advice they give you. If you still want to talk to our team and you want to learn more about us, then, we're happy to set that up for you. But if you don't, then that's okay too. And you don't have to talk to us. And you can just take what they give you and run with it on your own, right? But if that sounds good, if that sounds like it would be helpful for you guys, feel free to go and schedule that at www.wallstreetmastermind.com/apply. The street's abbreviated to ST, so it's wallstmastermind.com/apply. And we look forward to talking to you. All right. And so with that said, Andrew, I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule. I know you got practice and you got all this other stuff going on, but I'm glad we found the time to chat. I'm super happy for you with the outcome that you were able to get. Obviously, it's a great outcome, and you were able to do it in such a short amount of time, which is amazing. And looking forward to seeing all the success that you have, both during your summer internship, as well as beyond that during full time and whatever you may do after banking. So
Awesome. Thanks, Sam. Appreciate it.
yeah, absolutely, man. So guys, that'll be it for today, and thank you guys for tuning in. And we'll be back with more of these for you guys in the near future. All right, we'll talk soon.